So let's begin from, the recent one, which has been very key, which is the security, issue where Trump is threatening to say, hey, I'm coming down to save these people in Nigeria. Let's begin from that, because my question would be, how much does this kind of statement touch to, a very deep and dangerous narrative about the nation, one that can fuel religious divides and shift international perception as regards the nation? So what do we do to make this, something different and change it for the better for this nation, basically?
Well, fundamentally, we need to understand the dynamics of domestic and international politics. Countries all have vested interest, and in the context of Nigeria, I'm sure you know that the U.S. have a very strong gender strategic interest in Nigeria as a very strong partner. And in recent times also, we have then seen a bit of the shifting of the pendulum in terms of Nigeria's posture in bilateral and multilateral relationship, moving a bit also to having embrace with China and also having embrace with Russia. So you all heard about Trump, threatening to invoke military tools, or more or less a military intervention using the military to citizens, particularly Christians in Nigeria, controversy at the national and the international level. Let's look at both domestic and international. Again, that is getting a whole lot of future. Even though we have tended to see the Nigerian government, trying to take that kind of foreign policy posture that tries to guarantee, or at least to confirm to the international community, that the Nigerian government is doing all that it can to protect all citizens, irrespective of faith, religion, or ethnic leaning. But there is always that major concern if you talk to some local people, depending on where and who you are talking to. If you talk to people that are from the Middle Belt, for example, there is always that sentiment that is also attached, or more or less swing towards the direction of the position of Donald Trump, who then feel that most times the majority of those being targeted are Christians, and therefore is within the remit of the United States, adjudged moral policing capability and disposition to leverage its International Religious Freedom Act to make such a pronouncement. But overall, again, we also need to understand that that in itself is also creating a whole lot of tension at the international level. For example, where China and Russia has also tried to make an official position in that, to really against any country actually taking such a military and unilateral action in Nigeria, supposedly to protect Christians. But I think that assertion and the threat by Trump is already creating a whole lot of fissure, within the Nigerian context in terms of issues of religious leaning and issues of religious cleavages. For those up north, they think that assertion is unwarranted, that threat is unwarranted, because if you had opportunity of traveling to the northeast, for example, I just came back from Maiduguri last 3 weeks, where I did a lot of extensive field work. There's always this sentiment that majority of those who have been who are victims of the Boko Haram, I tend to believe in that argument, are largely Muslims. So for those who are occupying that geographic space in Nigeria, that kind of threat from Trump doesn't sit well with them. But if you also talk to those who are actually from the Middle Belt, then you also see that that kind of assertion is even being welcomed as more or less a messianic. Important thing is for us to really understand that that clearly raises a lot of questions in terms of Nigerian state, and in particular the government's capability to rein in all those who are actually contesting the monopoly of violence, and how that creates dangerous narratives, because it opens the flanks, like we say in the military, it opens the flanks for us as a sovereign country for external intervention, especially when we cannot really deal with the way and manner, the dynamics of violence, such that people can now take narratives around that. So in a sense, and if I must summarize, I think that the United States is also coming against the backdrop of tremendous influence that the evangelical mission that have a very strong hold in the Republican Party in the United States would have also presented on the table of Donald Trump, and Trump is also trying to leverage that as part and parcel of what he wants to achieve in terms of his foreign policy posture. But in Nigeria, I think also it's creating that fissure, along geographical lines. But I think that the Nigerian government is already doing a lot in terms of the posture I think they've taken in the last 1 week to be able to douse such tension.
All right, Prof, well said there. But you see, it raises questions again as regards religious extremism in Nigeria. We say it didn't start today, but it just keeps evolving from local, grievances to transitional movements, that now use digital platforms to spread various ideologies, in your research, basically. How has this radicalism, changed in recent years? And why do government responses still seem as if they're just a little behind?
Yes, and again, I think it is important to work with the context of the concerns and the controversy that comes as Trump made. Because you see, I'm sorry to use the word, but that is what comes to my mind. I think this country has a legendary history of ethno-religious violence, and that in itself is being seen from different perspectives. What we are seeing today did not really start today. Dating back in the 1980s, this country have had a very dangerous religious episode, particularly the Maitasine riot in 1980 to 1985. And of course, after that, we have episodes of violent religious outbursts associated with issues of blasphemy, issues of even having this world riot in Nigeria, or things that even take place outside Nigeria, but then tend to actually instigate religious violence. But I think, having monitored this religion security landscape in Nigeria, I think we have now seen fundamental shift. Shift in terms of religious violence and religious extremism not just being perpetrated at the individual level, but the extent to which we have now seen fundamental transformation and transmogrifications of groups that have just moved from mere fighting local grievances to the level where they've established transnational reach and they have the capability not only to launch attacks beyond the borders of Nigeria, particularly in the case of the Boko Haram and this splinter group, the Islamic State West African Province, but more importantly and more concerning, the fact also that these violent extremist group have also leaped up in terms of its technological adaptation to be able to use some of the digital media, social media platforms in order to actually radicalize individuals, dishing out propaganda messages and narratives that tend to cast them in that messianic view that they want to salvage their people from the clutches and bad governance in the context of Nigerian government. But I think it's something that really we need to look at, particularly the way and manner in which violent extremist organizations, and in this case I'm talking about Islamic State West African Province, have increasingly leveraged social media platform, Twitter, Telegram, to be able to propagate its ideology, to be able to actually demonstrate some of the battle space successes it has been able to do, particularly the kind of videos they make from attacks at military posts and civilians in order to radicalize individuals. So I think this is what DSS that is responsible to that kind of hidden surreptitious move of monitoring online systems to be able to take down some of those extremist content that has radicalization intent or that has the potential also to serve as a basis for recruitment for those who are supporting or sympathetic of the cause of these Islamic groups. But more importantly, I think it's an area that we need to do more, both in terms of monitoring, but in terms of proactive response, to be able to deny these guys the oxygen they breathe through with these platforms.
All right, that takes us, 2 minutes, you're just going to tell us, because you've just recently started working on some other part of your research that has to do with drone wars. Tech is coming into it. We're seeing a new, that new frontier, the era of drone wars. From both northwest, northeast, the drones are every part of the security, conversation right now. The question is, how has our response as a military, in the military nation, in the nation's military rather, how has the response been? And then what exactly are we supposed to be doing to really respond and shift in tactics? Because it is time to rethink counterterrorism. That was your statement. So what do you really mean in that sense?
Yeah, again, you see the what I call the jihadist sphere. So the jihadist sphere is more or less the geographic, technological, and the cyber domain where terror groups try to operate. Jihadist sphere has changed and evolved tremendously in recent times. But if you look at technological adaptation, I think the proliferation and deployment of drone becomes the most prominent and the most transforming in terms of this battle space. Sometimes in 2018, we saw jihadi group, particularly the Boko Haram or Islamic State West African Province, try to use and utilize these drones for purposes of ISR, and by ISR I mean intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And when they do that, it serves them two purposes. First, it helps them in battle preparation, but more importantly, the pictures they also pick, they use it for purposes of propaganda. However, from 2022 and then 2023, we then saw a kind of technological adaptation and leap that talked about, using these drones for purposes of weaponization. That means you can now deploy drones that have weapon and use it for targeting. That in itself is a clear major milestone in terms of technological innovation and adaptation by these groups.
All right, Prof. Let me hold you there for a moment.